So back then, it was before there were automobiles and trucks. It was when people rode horses, took passenger trains to get around. And it was also the time when people sent postcards and letters, and if they were in a big hurry, a telegram, because there were no telephones, televisions, or even radios for people to get their news. So let's consider that this is the time of history when today's story takes place, and it takes place in Suffolk, Virginia. We're going to meet a Black Universalist family that put their love into action by helping Black families in Suffolk, Virginia get access to a good education. So it was in 1904 that Reverend Dr. Joseph Fletcher Jordan and his wife Mary J. Davis took over the ministry at St. Paul's Universalist Church and Mission School. The church was established there a few years prior by the first two Black Universalist ministers, Joseph Jordan and Thomas Wise. Black families began attending the church and asked the ministers to open a school. Because of the segregation laws in Virginia, the public schools for Black children were different and not as good as the ones for white children. It would take many years to defeat these laws and get fair education. The idea for the segregation laws came from an idea called white supremacy. The idea that light or white skin is better than dark or Black skin, and people with white skin are better than people with Black skin. Our Unitarian Universalist values teach us that that idea is wrong. We believe that people are worthy and equal, period. So 125 years ago, segregation laws made it harder for Black children to get a good education. So families at the St. Paul Church wished for an excellent education for their children, and the school that the Jordan family opened did just that. It was called the Suffolk Normal Training School, and in just a few years, it grew to enroll 300 students a year. The school's graduation exercises featured performances and attracted thousands to attend. It was a cultural highlight of the year. You can see up on the screen a photograph from around that time that the school opened. Reverend Joseph's wife, Mary Davis, and later his daughter, Annie B. Jordan Willis, were teachers at the school. And when Reverend Joseph died in 1929, his daughter, Annie, took over as the school principal. Ms. Jordan Willis kept the school's doors open during the Great Depression, and it's the school's leader for over 40 years. The school became the Jordan Neighborhood House, and it stayed open until 1984. While the church did eventually close, the Jordan family put their love into action by noticing what the Black community needed, good schools, and making it the mission of the church, making it their mission as people to fulfill that need. The Jordan family put their love into action, and that love left a legacy. So I wonder, what values drove Reverend Jordan and Mary Davis and Annie Jordan Willis to work so hard to keep the school going? And I wonder how the idea of white supremacy impacted their lives personally and in the work of running the church and running the school. And I wonder, what are the places and the people that you feel that so devotion towards? So a little more of the story of Reverend Dr. Joseph Fletcher Jordan. His path to becoming the third Black man to become a Universalist minister started out when he trained to become a minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Like many of us, Reverend Jordan came into this faith. Like many of us, Reverend Jordan was attracted to come into this faith because of the ideas and teachings he discovered here. And like many of us, he used reason to question the beliefs he was taught about God and came to a new understanding. Joseph Fletcher Jordan was born in rural North Carolina in 1863 to an enslaved mother. As a child, newly emancipated, he longed for an education. As a teen, he found work as a janitor at a white church and was inspired to make his way to Barrett's College in North Carolina, earning a doctorate in divinity degree there. And this photograph that I'm showing you is not from Barrett's College, but from another black college at the time, down in Virginia. Now, Reverend Jordan was happy as a minister at first, but he decided to stop being a minister because he questioned what the church taught about God and love. The teachings of his church said that God's love was only for some people, and that God damned some people to eternal punishment. When a friend sent him a copy of a book by E.H. Lake, a Universalist minister, both Reverend Jordan and his wife Mary began using its teachings for their personal prayer practice. Lake's Christian Universalist message was that salvation through Christ was not about being saved from eternal punishment, but being saved in this lifetime from sin and unbelief. Lake taught that Christ's mission was to reveal God's love for all humanity, and that relief from sin was possible through repentance and forgiveness, acts of love that could take place here on earth. Now, Reverend Jordan stopped working as a minister and trained to become a lawyer. And he was working as a lawyer in North Carolina when he heard that Reverend Quillen Shin, a Universalist minister, would preach in his city. So he packed up his whole family, his 2 daughters and his wife, and they came out to hear Reverend Quillen Shin, who preached that God is love. Now, Quillen Shin traveled all over the country. He was a true missionary, and he also, you might know him as the founder of the Ferry Beach Retreat Center in Maine, which continues to be a Unitarian Universalist retreat center. Now, Reverend Jordan and his wife Mary, at this worship service led by Quillen Shin, they were so moved by what he preached that halfway through the sermon, as the story goes, Reverend Jordan turned to his wife Mary and whispered, "That's what I am." And Mary whispered back, "Make it 2." After the sermon, Reverend Jordan and Mary met with Quillen Shin, and Reverend Jordan agreed to work as a missionary for the Universalist denomination. And that's when he and Mary and their 2 daughters moved to Virginia. So he needed to do some preparation first. Having trained in a different tradition, he was asked by the Universalist ministers to spend a year at St. Lawrence University, Universalist Seminary. And then after that year, he was welcomed into fellowship as a Universalist minister. And then he and Mary moved to Virginia, where they quickly took up the work of the St. Paul Church and the mission school. He took over the mission that was founded by Reverend Joseph Jordan and Reverend Thomas Wise. And I'm able to relate these stories to you because of historical research by Virginia Unitarian Universalist Willard Frank. The stories of the Suffolk Mission appear in a book edited by Reverend Mark Morrison Reed called Darkening the Doorways: Black Trailblazers and Missed Opportunities in Unitarian Universalism. I feel deeply inspired by the Jordan family's commitment to love in action through their devotion to community and to education, and it is my hope to convey that strength of belief and action is what made them trailblazers. Yet the story of the ministry of the Suffolk Mission is incomplete without an account of how the ideas of white supremacy hampered the Jordans' efforts. Reverend Mark Morrison Reed describes one of the missed opportunities of the Suffolk Mission in a 2017 article in UU World magazine. He writes, "Suppose that funds had been forthcoming in 1911, when Joseph Fletcher Jordan asked Universalists to support plans to add a seminary to the African American school he ran in Suffolk, Virginia. the graduates might have fanned out across the South to preach the gospel of the larger hope, God's all-embracing love. They needed $6,000 for this effort. Jordan traveled around the Northeast in 1911 and 12, raising money, but in the end, came up with less than $1,500. To put this in context, in April of 1890, the Universalists began a mission in Japan. The Japanese mission was given at least $6,000 a year, often more, totaling more than $275,000. During the same years, the Universalists could not raise $6,000 for their, quote, mission to the colored people. What does that suggest, Mark Morrison Reed says? It suggests that Black lives don't matter, end quote. So can you imagine this school that was the pride of Suffolk's Black community, that threw a graduation ceremony so beloved that thousands attended and reporters gave it a write-up in those newspapers? If this school had trained Black ministers to preach the Universalist gospel, where would we be today? The missed opportunities did not end there with the dream of a seminary unfulfilled. Reverend Thomas Wise, the founding pastor of the St. Paul's Church, he left Universalism for the African Methodist Episcopal Church after a chilly reception from a powerful white Washington, D.C. minister, and the first iteration of a lack of funding for the mission, despite enthusiastic support from certain Universalists like Quillen Shin for his efforts. Another missed opportunity: when Miss Annie Jordan Willis took over the school after her father passed away, funding from the Universalist denomination and later the Unitarian Service Committee came with strings attached. White leaders from Boston, some who did not even visit the mission school, made demands about how mission funds were spent and eventually took control of the school away from Miss Jordan Willis. At first, the demands were to offer a job training style of education rather than an academic program. By the 1930s, the demand was that the school be converted from a school to a community center with social services, and thus it became the Jordan Neighborhood House. Miss Jordan Willis was able to maintain the kindergarten she loved, but the elementary and high school programs were closed. Things were up and down with relationships with the denomination over the years, and in 1969, the Unitarian Service Committee withdrew funds from the Jordan Neighborhood House, and it operated independently, with Miss Jordan Willis retiring in 1974 and the center closing in 1984. Sometimes love looks like acknowledging failure, yours as a person or as part of an institution, and seeking reconciliation. There are so many lessons of love that we can take from the strength and the vision of the Jordan family. And there's so much that love demands of us and asks of us as we hear the story of their triumphs and their challenges. So further reflection from Mark Morrison Reed, Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, the author of Darkening the Doorways. This is again from the 2017 piece that he wrote for UU World. The time in Unitarian Universalism when Black lives didn't matter has passed. Nonetheless, change is generational, incremental, and bruising. It comes, but not necessarily on our time schedule. We have fallen short and will again, and when we do, we need to pause and pray and ask, what does love demand of me? And then stand up and try again. Impatience is not what sustains us, but rather dreams, hopes, work, and companionship. The chance to pour out one's life for the faith, principles, and people whom we value. When I hear those words, what really sticks to my spirit is that feeling of impatience. I am so impatient for change. I want it right now, and I know how impatience defeats me because it makes me feel powerless. It makes me feel like what I do doesn't make a difference because I can't get what I want fast enough. And when I feel that way, I feel separated from that connection to the divine love that I know enfolds all of us, that is that heritage of our Universalist ancestors, like Reverend Joseph Fletcher Jordan and his family. Did you know that after the church closed in Suffolk, Virginia, Annie Jordan Willis, daughter of Joseph Fletcher Jordan, had to make a decision about where to go to church. And she did wind up going to the African Methodist Episcopal Church in town, but she always called herself a Universalist. Those teachings, they stick. So, the thing about impatience is that for me, it feels like it cuts me off from that feeling of love and connection with all that is, and also from feeling connected to people that I could count on to work together for change. When I'm feeling impatient, I'm asking myself questions like, can I trust myself to be a leader? Can I trust the community that I'm working with? And in these times, I need to turn to that advice that Reverend Mark Morrison Reed offers, which is to pause and to pray. And prayer might look and sound different for all of us, but for me, that prayer is often, love, please guide me. Please guide my way. Please let me pour out my life so that it is a life that brings more love and justice into this world. Love, please let me witness what I don't want to notice in the world. Please make it so that I don't turn to and rely on easy answers. Let me dwell in the complexity. Let me find acceptance for complexity, but not for suffering. Let me hold steady and recognize that I can take even a small action on this day towards justice, towards love, towards connection. Love, please give me a little hope today. The next thing that strikes me about what Reverend Morrison Reed offers is the question of, what does love demand of me? And that word demand, it lands kind of harsh to my ears. Kind of wish love might make a request, maybe a suggestion. But truly, the kind of love that we are talking about in this church, the kind of love that we say to the community that we stand for, it is a demanding kind of love. The same way that a little child's need to be fed and loved and cared for is a demand. If we neglect a demand like that, we're letting ourselves down. We're letting down the ones that we love. So we do have the opportunity to ask, what does love demand of us? And after learning more about the story of Reverend Jordan and the Suffolk mission, I would say that love demands that we take notice of the ways that the idea of white supremacy operates. That wrong idea was at the root of white folks in Virginia passing segregation laws, effectively making Southern Blacks second-class citizens through into many of our lifetimes. The ideology of white supremacy is like glitter. Glitter, once it spreads, it gets everywhere, and it is hard to clean up. Even when you have all sorts of cleaning tools, it's still there. It's mashed into the recesses of the minds and hearts of people of all races. It shows up as internalized oppression for Black and people of color. It shows up as unconscious bias for people of all races. And it shows up as indifference or denial in white folks. It's right here. It's right now. It's right now in the headlines about police officers in Ohio killing Tyree Nichols, a young Black man, during a traffic stop. There's that message of white supremacy, that Black bodies, Black people are inferior, that Black bodies need to be controlled by law or by force. This white supremacy is baked into how America trains its police officers regardless of their skin color. White supremacy can live in hearts and minds, but it can also live in the institutions and the structures of our culture, and it is our work. Love demands of us that we dismantle those structures, that we look hard at our institutions and notice where white supremacy has taken hold and change what needs to be changed. This is not easy work. This is the very kind of work that makes me impatient. I don't know about you. So I'll come back to what Reverend Mark Morrison Reed says. Change is generational, incremental, and bruising. It comes, but not necessarily on our time schedule. We have fallen short and will again, and when we do, we need to pause and pray and ask, what does love demand of me? For each of us, an ancestor true to our ancestry and our social location and our life experience awaits. Some things we here as Unitarian Universalists in Nashua can do locally is make sure that teachers in our public schools can teach honestly the history of race in this country by repealing the laws about divisive concepts that are hampering looking honestly at that legacy. Erasing this history doesn't make it go away. We can, as Unitarian Universalists, support the affinity group Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists, led by Black folks for Black folks in this faith, so that there can be a lasting legacy theology of Black liberation to the tune of Unitarian Universalism. And we can look, as our Widening the Circle of Concern book group did last year, and our Racial Justice Task Force continues to do, at the policies and procedures of our church to make sure that we are dismantling white supremacy where and when we see it. And I'd love to hear your ideas about what we can do, so come and find me during fellowship hour. Most of all, let us continue to be willing to ask. And as Mark Morrison Reed counsels, willing to ask ourselves what love demands of us, and then willing to dream, hope, work, and companion one another as a community of faith, a community of principles, and a community of people who we value. May it be so.